All right, so I'll get the video posted from last Tuesday. As far as the material that we got there, I didn't get a chance to post that, but I'll post that right after this. As far as the lab, as you guys know, we ran into issues, but that's all been resolved now. So down at the bottom, when you guys need to do your labs, you'll just click on a lab directly here. Again, I won't record the lab sessions. I'm going to record this one just for reference for some of the other people. You will not see all these extra lab reservations up here. These are all for students. I'm in the instructor view. What you'll need to do is come down here and schedule a lab for yourself. That'll be the only option you have. You will see the Palo Alto pods that are available. If you see they're all full, like what you see on this screen, there's an arrow up here in the upper right, and you can move that over to the right, and there's 20 some pods. So there's plenty of pods. You just have to move yourself around. Go ahead and schedule. I encourage you guys to schedule for no less than 8 hours on your reservation, because if you walk away, whatever, it's nice to have that available. You should have 8 hours on yours.
Okay, because I tried 4 hours and it said you're not allowed.
Okay, I'll fix that. But you should have 8 hours is what it should be letting you do. All right. As a matter of fact, just real quick, I'll check that. Should be 8 hours. Okay. When you come in here, go ahead and load up your lab reservation. For those of you that have used NetLab, most of you should have by now for Internet Working 1 and 2. As I mentioned before, the moment you click on this lab coming out of module 2, it will set a cookie in your browser. And so if you are taking Internet Working 1 or 2 or any other Cisco-based courses with John and Kevin that don't use the single sign-on method, you will have to start using incognito in order to log into NetLab directly. So with this, there's no usernames, no passwords. But if you utilize their classes, you're going to have to go back and start doing that in incognito mode. Otherwise, you'll have a conflict. All right, so this is the pod topology for all the labs that you're going to be using in this class. You have an external network up here in the upper right. That is a true internet cloud that you're going to connect to. From there, it's going to come down into a router. And then this router is going to give you an IP address on the inside, which will connect to the network connection on your Palo Alto firewall. This will end up being our outside connection. You'll also have a vWire connection out here to the DMZ and to the danger zone. This is where our DMZ server, which we'll use for testing. This would be the equivalent of having like a web server on your network. And then there's the inside network, which you see over here, connects to a client. We did set a firewall management port. So this is that management port that you guys have been configuring or been talking about on Tuesday. We are going to set that to the IP address of 192.168.1.254. So you can get to the firewall through the 1.254. Later on, when you configure it, you can also get to it through the 192.168.1.1. Because this falls on the same network, you can actually get to either one from the client. But the one that you're going to use for this class is the 192.168.1.254, simulating you coming into that management network that we talked about. All right. For all labs, you're going to click on the content tab. It's best to go ahead and undock this. This lets you actually see the full lab. Again, if you've got dual monitors, this is pretty slick because then you can put this on one monitor and do your lab on the other. If you don't, it's not a big deal. You can use Windows side by side. That's what I'm going to show you here in just a second. With the labs, they're going to be very similar to what you guys may have seen in the Cisco side. So they're all structured very similar. If you've done any other labs with us, you would see that as well. All the usernames and passwords and everything you're going to need are here in the lab settings. Note the spelling in Palo Alto. Note that those are zeros and not O's. All right. So for everything you're going to use in the system, you need to use this particular password. All right. Just like every other lab, we're going to slowly walk through as we go through here. So if you drag this off to the left, which is kind of slick, you go this on the right, and we can click on the client machine like it tells us to. It will automatically reorganize it there. If I shuffle this over a little bit to the right and zoom this down a little bit, I can get a better looking virtual machine. Again, for those of you that may or may not have used NetLab in the past, you can always undock your virtual machine here as well. So I can hit undock. I can actually make this full screen and I'll get a really nice resolution in order to work with your pods and VMs. If you click on the client at the top, the little drop down, you can go to undock.
No, I mean to that stuff.
So for the lab itself, that all comes out of Blackboard. This is all recorded, so you'll be able to go in there and see it. But if you go into module 2, you go down to the lab that's at the bottom, then you can go ahead and start the reservation.
I can't schedule more than like 8 hours. I can't even get to 8 hours. I can only go for like 4 maybe.
Okay.
It's just not letting me, like it just said, this is the maximum amount of time.
Yeah,
I'll take a look and see if I can change that. It might be another setting and I'll,
45%, biggest amounts.
okay. When we get done with this reservation, we'll make that change. All right. Excuse me. So while we're in this lab, this is pretty much how we're going to run through them on Thursdays. If you load this up, you'll want to go ahead and use the Chromium browser that they have on here. And under this EDU 210 folder, you'll want to click on Firewall A. Now, when you first click on this, more than likely, you're not going to get anything to come up. You need to let the virtual machines and everything boot up. It takes about a minimum of 3 minutes up to 5 minutes. If there's a bunch of users all on at once, it may take a little bit longer, but it's usually pretty quick as it comes through. You'll click on the advanced tab, click on the proceed, and you're going to get the main login here. So this will be admin. And then as it says in the lab, it's Palo Alto, paying attention to the zeros. All right, I'm going to go ahead and full screen this so we can see a little bit easier here. We'll bounce back. So as I mentioned before, when you guys are working in your labs, up here at the top is going to be your main row of buttons. So when they give you to go to device into management and setup or device setup interfaces, etc., you would always start with that first part is this tab here, up here across the top. So if we click on device and under setup, it wants us to go to operations. And then from there, we can load snapshots and we can save snapshots. So the way this lab is designed is at the end of the reservation, everything you do is going to get erased. All right. That means that there's presets already set up for you going to lab 2. In other words, you don't have to do lab 1 to get to lab 2. If you want to do lab 10 over and over and over, you can start at lab 10 and immediately start back up. So what you do is you come down here to load named snapshot configuration. And in the drop down, you'll see the different lab numbers. So if you were trying to do lab 1, you would obviously click lab 1. All these instructions are in the lab document off to the left. So when we click OK, it wants us to go ahead and confirm on the close. After we do that, remember there is a commit system with firewalls. So we need to go to commit. And at this point, we can see all the changes that would be going through here. So we can actually click on validate if we wanted to. We could preview any changes that were going in there. So if we preview in this example, it would tell us the difference between the two. There's not a whole lot in this because the lab's already set up for basically lab 1 already. If you can't see on this little one, you can resize your screen and do that. If I go out here to client and go to resize display, it should give me a little bit better resolution as I'm moving through it. Part of that's limited because of the me sharing the screen here in the classroom. Anybody have any questions so far? All right, commits, they take a little bit of time. So they go relatively fast inside the pod, which is awesome because as I was rebuilding a Palo Alto 820 the other night with, which is hardware, I was trying to move from Palo Alto 9 all the way to Palo Alto 10.2, which took me 7 hours, just under that to do that, because you have to do incremental jumps every time you do an operating system upgrade. And on a Palo Alto 820, which is relatively fast, every time I upgrade, it was another 30-minute upgrade, another 45-minute upgrade. It took me 7 hours the other night to get stuff up and running. I left here at 10 o'clock after our lab would not run. I finally got out here at 10 o'clock. All right. So now that that's loaded, we are set up and ready to do lab 1 at this point. When we come over here to the lab itself, we got lab 1. We've loaded everything up. It does want you to look at your task manager. So if we look down here at the lower right, you're going to see that we loaded this configuration. We can see the commit. We can see the time that we did it. This is really handy to go back if you're troubleshooting in a real environment and getting some of those logs or seeing what's currently running in the background. So we go through the commit phase, as you can see here, takes us all the way in. Now we're going to go ahead and set up the basic configuration for the firewall. So the first thing we need to do is go to device, setup, and then services. Again, it's going to show you these screenshots, but device, setup, and services. This is where we need to confirm that we're running updates.paloaltonetworks.com, that we're going to be using the DNS servers of 4 with 2s and quad 8s. So it's going to be using Google for our DNS. We can see all that information here, and we want to go through. It does want us to modify that secondary server to use the local one within the pod. So a 192.168.50.53. So we click on the little cog up here in the upper right. We would change this secondary server to use 192.168.50.50. What was it, 52? Go back and look here, 53. And then it wants us to change the primary to 8s. And again, we have updates.paloalto.com up here at the top. Now, again, because of my resolution, I can't get to this, so I'm actually going to undock this and then full screen it. This will generally resize it to where you can actually work with it. Okay, so we have those settings, and they should match whatever we have here in the document, which we can see here. So that all matches. It also wants us to adjust the NTP servers, again, using the 0 and the 1 pool.ntp. So if we come out here to our settings and click on our NTP tab, we want to actually set this up for 0.pool.ntp.org. And then on this side, we would use 1.pool.ntp.org. All right, if we look down here, it's going to have you double check these settings. So if we go ahead and hit OK. Whoop, did somebody online have a comment? Nope. Okay. All right, so we can see we have updates now. We got our quad 8s, we have our secondary DNS server, and we have our NTP server set up down here at the bottom. All right. Once that's done, it's going to have us go in and deal with the general management settings. So we're going to go to device, setup, and management. From there, we're going to work on the settings gear. So device, setup, and then management. And on this general settings, we're going to click on this cog. And then from there, it wants us to modify the domain, making sure that it's set to lab.local, which it is. We want to set up a login banner. So we're going to do authorized access only. Okay. And down in the time zone, it wants us to use this as the ETC, UTC. You can change this if you wanted to Central Time. That's perfectly fine here in the classroom. And it wants you to go ahead and hit OK. We're going to do one modification change here. Down at the bottom, you see this latitude and longitude. We talked about doing this for maps. If we wanted to set that in ours, we could easily come out here to maps.google.com. We could then find our Fort Hays and where this server is located. So if we come out here and look at, if I can figure out where I'm at here, there we go. This server is actually out here in Tamanic Hall. So if we right click on this, you will see that we can get the actual coordinates for this. So 3887.140, that would go in this first line. So 388470. I'm sorry, 7140. I was just a little off there. There we go. And if we look back at here, we have -99.34325.
And there's another 38.87140.
Ah. There you go. And then our 99.34325. There we go. Again, we can go ahead and hit OK on that. And that's going to go ahead and set those latitude and longitude settings. What that's useful for is later on when we're actually trying to determine where attacks are coming from, or threats coming from, or traffic's coming into our system. We are able to geographically see that on a map. It's actually built into the dashboard. It's pretty slick. Again, the lab won't have you do that, but this is some of the extra stuff that I'm going to walk you through that's useful if you guys were actually adminning these. Okay, so we come down there from the management. We need to set up our management interface. Obviously, it's already set up for us to be able to get into it, but if we wanted to modify those settings, we could click on interfaces up here at the top, and we would see our management interface. You can see within this that we have the IP address set, that we have our gateway and our net mask. You can also see that we have certain services turned on. So we have HTTPS. Notice that we do not have HTTP available on our system. You might have noticed when you guys don't use that drop-down link and you just type in 192.168.1.254, it goes nowhere. That's because you have to use HTTPS. All right. We don't even have HTTP turned on. We also have SSH in there, and we do have ping enabled so that we can actually ping those. Normally, on a normal system, you would want to modify what you have available here. You would also want to set up the permitted IP addresses, making sure that only the IP addresses that you have available are the ones that should be able to hit that interface. All right. That way, if anything comes in that's routed, that means it's not on the management network and they should not have access to the firewall. All right. So we hit OK there. You can see on this ad, it does want us to add the block for our management host only. So in this case, only our host is going to be able to access that. So let's go back in there. We click on add and we do a 192.168.1.20. They've slightly modified these labs since the last time I used them. Let's click OK. And so now we can see that that's set up for that portion of it. Once we've done that, it wants us to go out and check for new Palo Alto software. So as I mentioned, this is what I had to do the other day. We go out to our device, and down here on the left, we're going to go to our PM series software. There we go. And you can see if we do a check now, it's going to go grab the latest from the update server. Because we are a 192.168.1.254, that actually has access out to the internet. So for example, I can come up here, open up a new tab, go to google.com. All right, check that. We don't have internet access yet because we haven't set up that firewall that far, but the firewall can actually get out and go, right? So you can see here, we now have a new version 11 that's available to us along with all these other versions. The way Palo Alto works, for example, this will go clear back to Palo Alto 6 down here. If we want to move up, so for example, on this system, we have Palo Alto 10 installed, and then we moved up to Palo Alto 10.06. I can revert back to 10 if I wanted to. If I need to reinstall, I can do that. You can also go out here and check the release notes to see what's changed. That's beneficial as an admin so that you can actually see what's changed. If I wanted to jump clear up here to say version 10.2.3, I would actually have to do incremental versions instead. So I would have to come up here. I'm on currently 10.06, which means I would have to jump all the way to 10.0.11. Then from 11, I could install 10.1.0. Then from 10.1.0, I can go all the way up to 10.1.0.8. Then I have to jump up to 10.2.0. Then I can jump up to 10.2.3. It's all incremental in there. Now, one of the cool features within Palo Alto 11, which isn't going to be relevant for this class, but I found out they are now allowing you to jump 3 major revisions. So you can do 2 major revisions and 1 subsequent, which means that I don't have to sit there for 7 hours and do software updates just to get to the latest one. Very slick. Now, obviously, you shouldn't have a Palo Alto out there that is, 220 revisions old like mine was. It was sitting on Palo Alto 9. In theory, you should be updating those systems quite often. All right. For these particular ones, for the software is like, as you can see here, it's about every 2 to 3 months. There's some kind of software update. Now there's other updates in there that are much more current, much faster than that as you go through. That's just the software for the system itself, the actual operating system. So if we wanted to, we could actually update our virtual machine, and I encourage you to go out and play with it, see what it takes to update to another one. There's nothing you're going to break. If it doesn't work, you end the reservation and it all goes back to where it was. All right. So we are at the point now where we need to commit our changes. So if we go up here to commit, And you'll notice out here in the commit scope, it's going to tell you what section of things that we actually modified. In this case, the device and network. It's really slick to come out here and preview changes. We could use 10 lines of context, which means we can now see the config changes that go through. This is very similar to what you may have seen in Cisco configs as they work their way down. You can actually see that green is the new content. These are the lines. If we were going from the command line, this is what we would have had to have entered in at the command line. All right. What's also nice is you can use validate commit, which means it's going to try to commit those changes, test them, make sure it works before you actually commit them. I would encourage you to be in the habit of doing this as an admin. So as I was standing up a new Palo Alto the other night, I wasn't taking time. I just clicked commit all the time, forgot like 19 steps. And so my commits kept failing. And at one point it bricked it so bad I had to start all over again. So definitely try to validate your licenses. If all goes through, you're going to see something like this. The configuration is valid. We just don't have a threat license. That's fine. We'll hit close. We'll go ahead and commit. Again, this will take a little bit of time as you're playing with your labs. It's much, much faster on a VM50 than it is on physical hardware.
When did you want this thing?
What's that?
When this is.
There's nothing to turn in. So just you going through this lab is all you have to do. Yep. So you go through the lab, you hit close. At this point, you're technically done with the lab, but you could start going out and exploring a little bit and seeing what's out there. Now, obviously, you can't get to the internet yet. We're not configured yet. That's going to be next week. But you can go out here and take a few looks. So if we look at these dynamic updates, these are the individual updates for the individual software that we're using. So if we actually hit check now, you will see that we have the latest versions of our applications. By default, they're set to download only at Wednesday at 1 o'clock. So if we wanted to get the newest version, we could come over here and hit download. And it would go grab the latest package for us. Maybe. And then once it's downloaded, we can install it. So I'm going to check our licenses here just to make sure that I didn't miss anything on our systems. So we'll come out here and take a look at those. And you can see that we have one that was issued here January 31st. So we're good for at least 180 days. We got the eval. If we come out here to the dashboard, we can also see that we're activated and licensed. We come out to our device and our license and we say retrieve license keys from that, which we should already have. Let's see. Retrieve. There we go. And so we're still licensed for a standard 50 eval. All right. Once we get into the semester, some of these other ones are going to show up a little bit more in what we can do. So that's the basics of a lab. Once you're done with the lab, you simply close out of everything that you have here. And then the NetLab side, just make sure you go to reservation and in reservation. If you want to look at the firewall, this is just going to get you on the command line to the firewall. So you can go there. We could also SSH into the box, but this is essentially connected to what would be the console connection of the firewall. This DMZ is going to be a server that's over there. There's really nothing you guys are going to do with that. And then the V router itself up here, again, nothing you're going to do with that. All that router is doing NAT translation for us so we can get out to the internet. All right. So when we end this reservation and then now, you can hit yes. And at that point, your reservation's over. You can double check by going back to Blackboard and clicking on the grade center. And in the full grade center, as you guys do your labs, you should see points fill in here. And you should have 10 points show up in this lab 1 if you completed the lab. All right. You should get 10s all the way across as you start going through it. If you go back into that lab to do it again, and for some reason you exit out of it real fast, it may lower your score from 10 to something else. That doesn't matter because once I get done, I'll go back and update everybody up to 10s. So no files, no lab reports for you to fill out, nothing like that. You just need to complete the lab and it kicks a score back to NetLab. Again, if you skip a lab or don't do a lab or something like that, it's going to catch up with you at the end of the semester. I'm not worried about it. So do your labs. There's no due dates. There again, you need to have them done by Sunday just to stay in line. But if you can't get it done on Sunday, something comes up, whatever, I'm not a stickler on those due dates. They just got to be done by the week before finals week so that I can start putting in grades and letting you know where you're at. For you guys here in the classroom, you have to have them in before midterm. Actually, you know what? Take all that back. All the labs due at midterm, you have to have done by midterm because now we have to enter in midterm grades for online students as well. So make sure you have your labs up to midterm done. Otherwise, I'll put in a 0, but you can always do the lab after that and fill yourself back up. All right. Anybody got any questions on how to do labs?
I have a question about the topology.
Yeah.
In this topology, they're putting the management interface on the same inside network zone. Shouldn't the management be out of band?
That's
not
correct.
on the-
Yes, you are correct. So it is in theory out of band and it's only accessible to this client. That's what they did within this topology. In the real world, you probably would not want to put this on the same as the inside network. This should be on a completely segregated network for you to access. So whether this client needs to, VPN over there, or it has routes in order for it to go from the 192.168 to whatever management network, that's what I would encourage in that route.
Okay.
The idea is if this routes and everything goes down, in this case, the client can still get to it, but you typically don't want this available to your inside users. And in a full-blown deployment, you would have multiple zones inside of here, not just inside. You would probably have things like HR broken up, just like you would do VLANs and internet networking too, very similar to what you would typically map those to in security zones. And we'll start talking about what zones mean and why you would have to have more zones, but you also don't want to get crazy on zones, that kind of thing. Great question. Anybody else have any questions here or online? All right, stop the recording.